If she hadn't touched him, he wouldn't have made it past that sip. The glass caught the chandelier light as Adrian Wolfe lifted it, amber liquid swirling with quiet precision. The kind of moment that looked expensive, controlled, untouchable, just like him. And no one noticed the waitress watching from 3 tables away. No one noticed how still she stood while the rest of the room moved in polished rhythm. Except for the way her eyes didn't follow the CEO, they traced something else. Something just behind him. Something that didn't belong. Clara Bennett had been on her feet for 9 hours, her black shoes pressing against marble floors that reflected every movement, every shadow, every mistake. And she had learned to read rooms the way others read headlines. Quickly, silently, without asking permission. The dinner was important. That much was obvious. Tailored suits, low voices, a deal hanging in the air like a held breath. Adrian didn't look at her when she poured the wine. Didn't need to. People like him rarely did. They expected service, not presence. But Clara noticed the small things. The way one guest leaned in too close. The way a hand brushed the table just a second too long. The way a glass shifted when no one should have touched it. Subtle, almost nothing, but not nothing. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray. Her heartbeat steady, not fast, never fast, just focused. She stepped back into place as Adrian reached for the glass again, lifting it with the same effortless confidence that built billion-dollar companies. And that was when she moved, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. Her hand closing around his wrist, firm enough to stop him, gentle enough not to break the illusion of control. "Sir, don't," she said softly. And for the first time that night, Adrian Wolfe looked directly at her, irritation flickering in his eyes, the room shifting as attention snapped toward them. A waitress touching a CEO, a line crossed, a mistake. Security already stepping forward, conversations pausing mid-sentence. But Clara didn't look at Adrian. She was still watching the reflection in the glass behind him, still tracking the man who had already begun to walk away, slow, deliberate, like nothing had happened at all. Adrian's grip tightened slightly against hers, ready to pull back, ready to dismiss her like everything else in the room. But something in her eyes, calm, certain, unmoved, made him hesitate for half a second longer than he should have. And in that half second, everything began to change. Adrian did not pull his hand away immediately, and that alone sent a ripple through the room, because men like him did not hesitate. They decided, they moved, they controlled. Yet now his glass hovered midair, his wrist held by someone who should have been invisible, and for a brief second, the balance shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. "Explain," he said quietly, his voice low but edged with something sharper than irritation. Clara did not look at him. Not yet, her eyes still fixed on the reflection in the mirrored column across the room. The man was closer to the exit now, one hand in his coat pocket, his pace unhurried, too calm for someone who had nothing to hide. "Set the glass down," she replied, just as calm, just as steady, and something in her tone, not fear, not urgency, but certainty, made Adrian place the glass back on the table without breaking eye contact with her. Security reached them a moment later, tension coiling in the air. "Sir, is there a problem?" one of them asked, already positioning himself between Adrian and the rest of the room. Clara released her grip slowly, her fingers leaving his wrist as if nothing unusual had happened. But her posture remained the same, straight, composed, unshaken. "No problem," Adrian said, though his gaze had shifted now, following the direction Clara had been watching, catching the tail end of a man moving toward the door. "Stop him," Adrian added, not raising his voice, but it carried. It always did. The security team reacted instantly, moving with purpose but without chaos, weaving through tables, through startled guests, through the carefully maintained illusion of a perfect evening. The man paused when he noticed, just for a fraction of a second, enough to confirm what Clara already knew, and then he kept walking, but now faster, not running, never running. People who planned things like this did not run. They exited, clean, quiet, almost forgettable. Almost. Adrian turned back to Clara, studying her now, really studying her, as if seeing her for the first time. Not the uniform, not the role, but the person standing in front of him. "You are going to tell me why you just stopped me from taking a drink," he said. And there was no anger in it now, only focus, Clara finally met his eyes, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded again, replaced by something quieter, sharper. "Because someone needed you not to," she said. Simple, direct, but it was not enough. Not for him. Not for the kind of man who built his life on answers. "That is not an answer," he replied, and she nodded slightly, as if she expected that, as if she had already calculated this part too. "Then watch," she said, and gestured, just slightly, toward the table, where another guest, curious, unaware, had reached for the same bottle, pouring himself a small glass, raising it with a casual smile, the kind of moment no one would have noticed 5 minutes ago, but now every eye seemed to catch it at once. The glass lifted, paused, hovered in the same light Adrian's had moments before, and Clara did not move this time. She only watched, her expression unchanged, as if the answer Adrian wanted was about to reveal itself without another word. The man smiled as he lifted the glass, unaware of the silence that had slowly wrapped around him, unaware that dozens of eyes were now fixed on a moment that should have been ordinary. The soft clink of crystal, the faint swirl of amber liquid, the quiet confidence of someone enjoying a fine drink. And for a second, nothing happened, just a sip, a pause, a blink. Then his expression shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that would alarm a room at first, just a slight confusion, like he had forgotten what he was about to say, his hand lowering the glass back to the table a little too carefully, a little too slowly. And that was enough. Enough for the trained eye, enough for Clara, enough for Adrian, who felt something cold settle behind his ribs as he watched. The room began to stir, whispers replacing laughter, chairs adjusting, people leaning in without meaning to. The man steadied himself against the edge of the table, his composure slipping just enough to break the illusion. And suddenly, it was no longer a normal evening, no longer a business dinner. It was something else entirely. Security reached him within seconds, guiding him gently, professionally, away from the table, voices low, controlled. No panic, no chaos, just swift containment. But the damage was already done. The realization spreading faster than any announcement could. Adrian did not move, his eyes locked on the untouched glass in front of him. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned back to Clara, the question already forming before he spoke it. "How did you know?" His voice quieter now, stripped of authority, replaced by something far more rare, uncertainty. Clara exhaled softly, not relief, not tension, just a release of focus, her gaze shifting briefly toward the exit where the man had disappeared, already gone, already blending into a world that would not notice him. "I did not know," she said, and Adrian frowned slightly, the answer not matching the certainty she had shown. "Then why stop me?" He pressed, and Clara tilted her head just enough to meet his eyes again, calm, steady, unshaken by everything unfolding around them. "Because everything about that moment was wrong," she said quietly. "The way the bottle was handled, the way he moved, the way no one else noticed." She paused, just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. "And you were about to trust it without question." Adrian followed her gaze again, replaying the moment in his mind. Every detail he had dismissed, every signal he had ignored, the realization building slowly, uncomfortably, that she had seen what he had not because she had more information, but because she had paid attention, real attention, the kind that did not come from power or wealth, but from experience, from watching, from surviving. He looked back at her, this time differently, not as a waitress, not as background, but as someone who had just changed the outcome of his night. Maybe more than that. "Who are you?" he asked, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. And for the first time, Clara hesitated, just a fraction, her composure shifting almost imperceptibly, as if that question mattered more than anything that had just happened, as if the answer was not something she gave easily. The room buzzed around them, security moving, staff whispering, guests processing what they had just witnessed, but in that small space between them, everything felt still again. Clara glanced down at the table, at the glass he never drank from, then back up at him, her voice softer now, but no less certain. "Someone who learned to notice the things people like you are too busy to see." Adrian held her gaze a second longer than necessary, as if weighing her words against everything he thought he understood about control, about certainty, about the kind of world where nothing slipped past him unnoticed. But tonight something had, and the person who caught it was standing in front of him in a simple uniform, hands steady, expression unreadable. The noise of the room slowly returning as the immediate tension dissolved into low conversations and cautious glances, staff moving carefully, resetting what they could, pretending normalcy could be restored that easily. But Adrian did not move, his attention fixed on Clara as if the rest of the room had faded into the background. "That is not something you learn from serving tables," he said quietly, not accusing, just stating what had become obvious. Clara gave the smallest shrug, not dismissive, just controlled, as if she had heard that assumption before, many times. "People learn different things in different places," she replied, already beginning to step back, already returning to the role expected of her. But Adrian was not finished, not this time. "Wait," he said, the word simple, but it carried weight, enough to pause her movement, enough to shift the air again. She stopped, just slightly, turning her head but not fully facing him, a line drawn without being spoken. "Look at me," he added, softer now, and this time she did, fully, directly, without hesitation, without submission, and that was new. That was different. Adrian was used to people looking at him with expectation, with calculation, with something to gain, but Clara's gaze held none of that. Only clarity, only distance, only the quiet strength of someone who did not need anything from him. "You saw him before tonight," Adrian said, not a question, but not entirely a statement either. Testing, probing, Clara's expression did not change, but something in her stillness confirmed it more than any answer could. "Maybe," she said, and the word hung there, incomplete, deliberate. Adrian exhaled slowly, his mind already moving ahead, connecting fragments, patterns, possibilities, the kind of thinking that had built his empire. But this time it felt different, because he was missing pieces he could not access, and she had them. "You waited," he said, realization sharpening his tone just slightly. "You did not stop him when he touched the bottle." Clara's eyes flickered for just a moment. Not fear, not guilt, just acknowledgement. "No," she said simply. Adrian leaned back a fraction, studying her as if the answer mattered more than anything else. "Why?" he asked. And this time there was something closer to urgency beneath the control. Clara glanced briefly toward the door again, as if confirming the distance had been secured, as if ensuring the moment had passed fully. Then she looked back at him, and for the first time, there was a hint of something deeper behind her calm, not regret, but wait. "Because I needed to be sure," she said, her voice quieter now, but more grounded. "If I was wrong, I ruin your night, your deal, your reputation." She paused, letting that settle, then added, "If I was right, I only get one chance to stop you." Adrian absorbed that, the logic, the restraint, the risk she had calculated in seconds while everyone else was focused on appearances, and something shifted again, not in the room, but in him, a recognition, reluctant but undeniable, that she had operated with a level of precision he respected, even if he did not yet understand it fully. "You took a risk," he said, and Clara nodded once, a small, almost invisible motion. "So did you," she replied, glancing briefly at the untouched glass, then back at him, and the meaning was clear without explanation. Adrian followed her gaze, the glass still there, unchanged, but now it carried a different weight, a different story, one that could have ended very differently. He looked back at her, slower this time, more deliberate. "What else did you see?" he asked, and Clara did not answer right away, not because she did not know, but because she was deciding whether to say it. And that silence, that choice, carried more tension than anything that had happened so far. Clara did not answer immediately, and that silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional, not hesitation, but selection, as if she were choosing which part of the truth Adrian was ready to hear. The room around them continued to rebuild itself, glasses replaced, voices softened, the illusion of control carefully stitched back together, but the space between them remained untouched by it. Sharper, clearer, the timing, she said finally, her voice low, measured. Adrian leaned in, slightly, not enough to draw attention, just enough to close the distance. "What about it?" he asked, And Clara's eyes flicked once toward the table where the bottle still stood, now isolated, now avoided. He did not rush, she said. He did not look around to see who was watching. He did not check your reaction. She paused, letting each detail settle. He assumed no one would notice. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. That kind of confidence was not accidental. It was planned, practiced, repeated. That is not unusual in a place like this, he replied, gesturing subtly to the room, to the wealth, the distractions, the expectation that nothing ever goes wrong. Clara shook her head, just once, precise. It is when it is combined with everything else, she said, and Adrian waited, because now he understood that her conclusions came from layers, not guesses. The bottle was placed too cleanly, she continued. No condensation ring, no movement from staff, but it was suddenly within reach. Adrian's eyes shifted to the table again, replaying it, seeing it differently now, and no one questioned it. He murmured, more to himself than to her. Clara nodded. Slightly, because everyone assumes someone else already did, she said, and that landed harder than anything else, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Adrian exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that came when something fundamental shifted, not outside, but inside. You noticed all of that in seconds, he said, and this time it was not a challenge. It was acknowledgement. Clara's expression softened, just barely, not pride, not satisfaction, just acceptance. You learned to, she replied, and Adrian studied her again, not searching for answers this time, but recalibrating, adjusting the way he saw her, the way he understood the situation, the way he understood control itself. You said you might have seen him before, he said, circling back, connecting the threads. Clara did not deny it, but she did not confirm it either. I notice patterns, she said instead. Faces, habits, places people should not be. Adrian's mind moved quickly, mapping possibilities, security, breaches, internal leaks, intentional access. This was no longer just about a single moment. It was a system, and someone had tested it, quietly, confidently. And tonight he did not belong, Adrian concluded, and Clara met his eyes again, steady, certain. No, she said, he did not. The weight of that answer settled between them, heavier now, broader, because it meant the situation was not random, not isolated. It was something that had been prepared, something that had almost succeeded. Adrian straightened slightly, the familiar edge of control returning, but not the same as before, sharper now, more aware. My security team will want to speak with you, he said, not as an order, but as a necessary step. Clara glanced toward the floor manager, then back at him, her expression unchanged. They already will, she replied, and there was no resistance in her voice, no fear, just quiet acceptance of what came next. Adrian studied her for another moment, then gave a small nod, not dismissal, not approval, something else, something closer to respect, though he would not name it yet. Stay, he said, and Clara did not move, not because he told her to, but because she had already decided she would. And in that subtle difference, something shifted again, something neither of them fully acknowledged yet, but both understood was there. The first of Adrian's security team approached with controlled urgency, not rushing, not alarming the guests any further, but their presence alone shifted the atmosphere again, sharper now, more deliberate. One of them leaned in close to Adrian, speaking in a low voice that carried only fragments. We have contained the situation, sir. Medical is handling the guest. No escalation. Adrian nodded once, his attention only briefly acknowledging the update before returning to Clara, because the situation might have been contained, but the question had not been. She stays, Adrian added quietly, and the guard's eyes flicked toward Clara, assessing, recalculating, then giving a short nod before stepping back. Clara did not react to the exchange. She simply stood there, composed, as if being included in high-level security decisions was not unusual, or perhaps as if she refused to let it matter. Adrian noticed that too. Of course he did. He noticed everything now, or at least he was trying to. You said you notice patterns, he continued, his tone calmer, more focused than before. Then tell me this was not the first time. Clara held his gaze, and for a moment, the answer sat between them before she spoke it. It was not, she said, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than any detailed explanation could. Adrian's expression did not change, but something behind it did, something sharper, more dangerous, not outwardly, but in the way his mind began to move again. Faster now, deeper. How many? He asked, and Clara did not answer immediately, not because she did not know, but because she was measuring the impact of the number. Enough to recognize it tonight, she said finally, and Adrian exhaled slowly. That was all he needed to hear, not the count, but the confirmation. This had been tested before, refined, adjusted, and tonight had been an execution attempt that failed by inches, or rather, by one decision, by one person paying attention when no one else did. Adrian glanced toward the door again, toward where the man had disappeared, and for the first time, there was something close to frustration beneath his control, not because he lost track of the man, but because he had not seen him at all, not until it was too late. My people will find him, Adrian said, more to himself than to Clara, and she did not challenge that, did not agree either, she simply observed, because finding someone after the fact was different than stopping them before the moment happened, and she knew the difference mattered. Adrian turned back to her, studying her again with that same intensity, but now layered with something new, something closer to respect, even if he would not name it yet. Why here? He asked, shifting the angle. Why this place, this table, this timing? Clara's eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in the layout, the exits, the spacing between tables, the way staff moved in predictable patterns. Because it looks perfect, she said, because no one expects anything to go wrong in a place like this. She paused, then added, and because you were here. Adrian's brow lowered slightly, not offended, but intrigued. Explain that, he said, and Clara met his gaze again, steady as ever. You are predictable, she said plainly, not as an insult, but as a fact. Your schedule, your habits, the places you choose, the way you sit, the way you trust your environment. Adrian absorbed that without reaction, but the truth of it was undeniable. His world was controlled, structured, efficient, and that predictability was a strength in business. But here, tonight, it had almost become a weakness. And you think someone is studying that, he said, and Clara did not hesitate this time. I know they are, she replied, and that certainty settled heavier than anything else she had said so far, because it meant this was not over, not even close. Adrian straightened slightly, his posture shifting back into something more familiar, more controlled, but now with an edge of awareness that had not been there before. Then we are going to change the pattern, he said quietly, and Clara watched him for a moment, as if evaluating whether he truly understood what that meant, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not agreement, not approval, just acknowledgement that he had taken the first step, even if he did not yet realize how much more there was to see. Adrian's words lingered between them. We're going to change the pattern, but Clara did not respond right away, because she had heard that kind of confidence before, not from him, but from others who believed control could be adjusted like a schedule, like a meeting time, like something simple, and it never was. The room had almost returned to normal now. Almost, but there was a subtle difference in the air, something quieter, more alert, as if people sensed something had shifted even if they could not explain it. Adrian noticed it too. Of course he did. But this time he did not dismiss it. He let it register. He let it inform the way he stood, the way he scanned the room, the way he paused before moving. And that was new. Patterns do not change because you decide they do, Clara said finally, her voice calm, not challenging, just stating something that did not require agreement. Adrian looked at her, not defensive, just attentive. Then how do they change? He asked, and for the first time, there was no edge in his voice, only focus. Clara shifted her weight slightly, her gaze moving across the room again, not searching for danger now, but observing structure, behavior, repetition. You stop being the center of them, she said, and Adrian frowned slightly, not because he disagreed, but because he was processing, translating her words into something actionable, something measurable, something he could use. That is not how my world works, he replied, and Clara gave the smallest nod, as if she expected that answer. That is why your world is easy to study, she said, and that landed differently. Not as criticism, but as a fact he could not ignore. Adrian exhaled slowly, his mind already adjusting again, recalibrating strategies, not just for business now, but for something far more personal, something far more immediate. Then you will help me change it, he said. And this time it was not a suggestion, but it was not a command either. It was something in between, something that assumed she had a choice, and that he needed her to make it. Clara looked at him for a moment, longer than before, measuring not his words, but his intent, his awareness, the shift that had begun but was not yet complete. Why would I do that? She asked, not out of defiance, but because the question mattered. Adrian did not answer immediately, and that pause, that rare hesitation, said more than anything else. Because men like him always had answers, always had reasons, always had leverage, but this time he was searching for something else, something honest. Because you already did, he said finally, his voice quieter now, more grounded. And you did it without being asked. Clara held his gaze, the weight of that acknowledgement settling between them. Not praise, not gratitude, something deeper, something closer to recognition. And for a moment, the distance between them shifted again, not in status, not in power, but in understanding. She glanced briefly toward the untouched glass once more, then back at him. One moment does not change everything, she said, and Adrian nodded slightly, accepting that. No, he replied. But it changes what comes next. Clara studied him, as if deciding whether he truly understood the difference. Then she turned her attention toward the entrance of the restaurant, where the doors opened quietly, and two more figures stepped inside, not hurried, not obvious, but out of place in a way only someone paying attention would notice. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in alarm, but in focus, the same stillness returning to her posture, the same quiet shift that had happened before everything changed. Adrian followed her gaze instinctively this time, not questioning, not dismissing, just observing, learning, and for the first time that night, he saw it too. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to feel that something was not right, enough to understand that this was not over, and that whatever came next, he would not be the first to notice it. She would. Clara did not move right away, and that was the first signal, not the people who entered, not the doors closing softly behind them, but the way she became still again, the same stillness Adrian had learned to recognize only minutes ago, the same quiet shift that meant something had already begun. The two figures stepped inside with practiced ease, not drawing attention, not scanning the room the way security would, but blending, adjusting, becoming part of the environment too quickly, too smoothly, and that alone made them stand out. Adrian narrowed his eyes slightly, following Clara's line of sight, forcing himself to slow down, to see what she saw, not what he expected to see. One of the figures paused near the bar, the other continued forward, not toward any specific table, but toward the center of the room, as if positioning mattered more than destination. You see it, Clara said quietly, not a question, and Adrian nodded once, slower than usual, more deliberate. They are not here to dine, he replied, and Clara gave a faint nod, confirming without adding more, because she did not need to. The pattern was already forming. Adrian's security team shifted subtly, reacting to his posture rather than a command. But Clara's gaze flicked toward them for just a second, and then back to Adrian. If they move now, they disappear, she said, her voice low, precise. You act too soon. You lose them. Adrian understood that immediately. The instinct to control, to intervene, to shut it down, was strong, automatic, but he held it back, because this time, he trusted the observation more than the reaction. Then we wait, he said, and Clara did not respond, but her stillness remained, confirming the decision without words. The room continued to breathe around them, unaware of the tension threading through it, unaware that something was unfolding just beneath the surface of polished conversation and expensive glassware. The figure near the bar lifted a glass, not drinking, just holding it, scanning reflections instead of faces, while the other slowed near a service station, their hand brushing the edge of the counter, not enough to be noticed, but enough to matter. Clara's eyes tracked the movement without turning her head, her focus precise, controlled. Adrian followed, slower, learning, adjusting, seeing fragments instead of the whole, but enough to understand the direction. They are testing again, Adrian murmured, and Clara's gaze flickered briefly toward him, acknowledgement without distraction. Not the same way, she said softly. They changed something. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, not in fear, but in concentration. What? He asked, and Clara's eyes narrowed just slightly, analyzing, recalculating. The timing, she said, echoing her earlier words, but now deeper, more complex. They are watching you react. Adrian felt that settle. The realization that this was no longer just about opportunity, but about response, about adaptation, about someone learning from each attempt, refining it, perfecting it. And that meant something far more dangerous than a single moment. It meant a pattern evolving. Adrian straightened just slightly, adjusting his posture, not for appearance, but to disrupt expectation, to break the rhythm someone else was counting on. Clara noticed that too. Of course she did. And for the first time, there was the faintest shift in her expression, not quite approval, but recognition. Good, she said quietly, and Adrian almost smiled, not out of confidence, but because he understood what that meant. The two figures continued their movements, subtle, controlled, but now Adrian saw them differently, not as background, not as guests, but as variables, as part of a system he had not known existed until tonight. And for the first time, he was not leading the situation, he was learning inside it, and Clara, without raising her voice, without stepping forward, without claiming any control, was the one guiding what happened next. Adrian did not speak again, and that was the final shift, not in the room, not in the movement of the two figures, but in him, because for the first time that night, he chose silence over control, observation over action, and that changed everything. Clara remained still beside him, her eyes tracking the subtle rhythm of the room, the figures, the reflections, the pauses that most people would never notice. The man near the bar adjusted his position slightly, turning just enough to catch Adrian's reflection in the glass behind him, not directly, never directly, while the other drifted closer to a different table, not the same one, not repeating the pattern, but echoing it just enough to test whether anyone was paying attention this time. Adrian felt it now, the structure beneath the surface, the invisible lines connecting movement to reaction, expectation to outcome, and for the first time, he did not disrupt it. He let it unfold, because Clara had been right. Acting too soon would end it, but understanding it might stop it for good. One of the figures reached toward a glass that did not belong to them, just for a second, just enough to mirror the earlier moment, and then stopped, as if reconsidering, as if waiting for something. Adrian did not move, did not signal, did not break the pattern they were studying, and that hesitation, that absence of reaction, changed the rhythm in a way even he could feel. Clara's gaze sharpened slightly, catching the shift instantly. They expected you to intervene, she said under her breath. Adrian nodded almost imperceptibly, his focus locked, and now, he replied quietly, and Clara finished the thought without looking at him. Now they are unsure. The uncertainty spread through the figures in subtle ways, a delayed step, a glance that lasted half a second too long, a break in the smooth confidence they had carried when they entered, and that was enough. Enough for Clara to see the pattern crack. Enough for Adrian to understand that control did not always come from action. Sometimes it came from restraint. The man near the bar set his glass down, not drinking, not completing the action he had initiated, and for the first time, it felt incomplete, abandoned. The other figure shifted course entirely, moving toward the exit without finishing whatever role he had been playing. Not rushed, never rushed, but different, less certain. Adrian exhaled slowly, the realization settling deeper now. This was not just an attempt, it was a system, one that adapted, learned, tested, and tonight, for the first time, it had been interrupted before it could complete its cycle, not by force, not by confrontation, but by awareness, by someone refusing to follow the expected pattern. Clara finally relaxed her stance. Just slightly, not fully, but enough to signal that the moment had passed, at least for now. Adrian turned to her, not as a CEO, not as someone in control, but as someone who had just learned something he could not ignore. You saw all of that before it happened, he said, not a question, and Clara met his gaze, calm as ever. I saw enough, she replied. Adrian nodded slowly, accepting that answer, understanding now that certainty was not always required. Sometimes attention was enough. He glanced once more toward the exit where the two figures had disappeared, then back at Clara. The weight of everything that had almost happened, everything that had been avoided, settling into something quieter, something lasting. "This does not end here," he said, and Clara gave a small, knowing nod. "No," she replied softly, her eyes steady, her voice certain. "It never does." Adrian held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, not dismissing her, but thinking, adjusting, changing in a way that would not be visible to anyone else in the room. The untouched glass still sat between them, unchanged, but now it meant something entirely different, not a mistake avoided, but a lesson learned, one that would follow him long after this night ended. And as Clara turned to return to her tables, blending back into the quiet rhythm of the restaurant, there was one thing Adrian understood clearly, something he had not known before tonight, that the most dangerous moments were not the loud ones, not the obvious ones, but the ones that looked perfectly normal, and the only people who could stop them were the ones no one was watching.